Everyone's busy chasing old Land Cruisers, Supras, and analog-era Toyotas right now. Meanwhile, the real opportunity is quietly forming in dealership lots and used car listings across North America, cars that don't look exciting today, don't feel special yet, and aren't being hoarded, but will be. The 2020s are going to create future classics the same way the early 2000s did, slowly, quietly, and with a lot of people missing it in real time. The question isn't which Toyota or Lexus will be legendary, it's which ones will still be affordable when everyone finally realizes it. Nobody thinks the affordable, entry-level sports car becomes a classic while it's still new. That's exactly why the GR86 is dangerous in the long run. This car exists in a shrinking window of automotive history where lightweight, a naturally aspirated engine, and a manual transmission are still allowed to coexist without apology. It isn't fast in a headline way, and that's the point. Future collectors won't remember it for 0 to 60 numbers. They'll remember how it feels. The flat 4 makes just enough power to reward commitment instead of hiding mistakes. Around 200 horsepower sounds modest today, but paired with a curb weight that still respects physics, the car talks to you. Steering feedback, balance, throttle response, all the things disappearing as cars get heavier and more insulated. The manual gearbox is mechanical, not digital, and that alone is going to matter a lot 10 or 15 years from now. What really pushes this into future classic territory is timing. Toyota built this car right before electrification and driver aids started dominating even sports coupes. Stability systems are present, but not intrusive. You can still drive it wrong, and that's a compliment. Buyers today often dismiss it as slow and move on. That same mistake is why clean Integra Type Rs and early BRZs exploded in value later. There will be plenty of abused examples. Drifted, modified, tracked, crashed. Survivors will matter. Stock cars, original wheels, uncut interiors. Recommended years will be the early production run before mid-cycle revisions soften anything. Right now, prices sit in the low to mid 30,000s. That feels expensive until you realize it may be the last Toyota sports car built this honestly. And that raises the uncomfortable question, if this is the affordable one, what happens when Toyota stops making cars like this altogether? If you're ready, say the word and we'll move to something that looks nothing like a bargain today, but will shock people later. The LC500 already feels like a classic, which is exactly why people underestimate what it will become. When it launched, everyone focused on the price and walked away. Too expensive for a Lexus coupe, too heavy to be a sports car, too bold to be subtle. What they missed is that this car was never meant to chase trends. It was Lexus quietly building a final statement piece while the rest of the industry pivoted to screens and silence. That naturally aspirated V8 is the centerpiece, not just the sound, but the way it delivers power. Linear, smooth, and completely uninterested in turbo drama. Just over 470 horsepower paired to a traditional automatic that actually suits the character. This isn't a car you rush, it's a car you settle into. Long hood, low seating position, and an interior that feels hand-assembled instead of software updated. Mechanics will tell you something important here. The LC shares DNA with the LS platform, meaning overbuilt components designed for longevity. These engines aren't stressed, they're understated. That matters when we talk about future collectability, because reliability keeps classics alive long enough to become desirable. The biggest buyer mistake right now is assuming values will continue sliding forever. They won't. Production numbers are relatively low, colors are limited, and Lexus isn't replacing this car with anything comparable. The V8 LC is already gone in some markets. That alone creates scarcity. Real-world fuel economy sits in the high teens, which feels irrelevant when you realize buyers aren't cross-shopping this against efficiency. Clean examples today trade anywhere from the mid-60s to low 70s, depending on mileage. That window won't stay open forever. The LC500 isn't loud about its legacy. It doesn't need to be. But once Lexus stops building emotional cars like this, people will start chasing the ones that prove they still could. And speaking of cars people ignored because they didn't fit a neat category, the next one might be the most misunderstood Lexus performance sedan ever built. Quick pause for a second. If this is already changing how you look at the used market, tap like so YouTube knows this isn't clickbait. Subscribe if you want more breakdowns like this without the hype. And tell me in the comments what city you're watching from. Different markets tell very different stories. The GSF is what happens when a brand builds something incredible and then forgets to explain it to anyone. From day one, it lived in the shadow of louder German rivals and even Lexus's own ISF legacy. Too big, people said. Too subtle. Too expensive for a sedan without a turbo badge. and that misunderstanding is exactly why this car is going to age extremely well. Under the hood is the same 5-liter naturally aspirated V8 philosophy that defines Lexus at its best. Just under 500 horsepower, instant throttle response, and an engine that feels alive without relying on forced induction. No fake sound, no boost curves, no lag, just revs. Paired to an 8-speed automatic that isn't flashy but is brutally durable, this drivetrain was built to last far longer than most performance sedans of its era. Here's the mechanic insight most buyers miss. The GSF isn't a stressed platform. It's over-engineered. Cooling, brakes, suspension, all designed with longevity in mind, not lease cycles. These cars can take real mileage without turning into financial disasters, which is rare in the performance sedan world. Real-world fuel economy lives in the mid-teens, but nobody buys a V8 Lexus sedan expecting miracles. What they do get is comfort, space, and reliability wrapped around serious performance. And unlike its competitors, it doesn't beg for attention. That restraint will age beautifully. The big buyer mistake right now is ignoring it because it lacks a manual or flashy design. That same logic kept people away from E39 M5s years ago. Production numbers were low, especially in North America. Lexus walked away quietly, and there is no direct replacement. Today, clean GSF examples sit in the high 40s to mid 50s. That feels reasonable until you remember this is one of the last naturally aspirated V8 performance sedans ever sold new. And if a misunderstood sedan can become collectible, imagine what happens when we shift from forgotten performance to vehicles that were never meant to be rare, but absolutely will be. 10 years from now, people are going to argue about when Toyota lost the plot, and the 5th-gen 4Runner will sit right in the middle of that conversation as proof they didn't, at least not yet. This truck survived an entire decade with old-school engineering, while everything around it went softer, more complex, and more disposable. That alone puts it on a future classic trajectory. Start with what it refuses to be. No Turbo 4, no hybrid-first mindset, no car-based platform pretending to be rugged, body on frame, a naturally aspirated V6, and a 5-speed automatic that feels ancient because it is. About 270 horsepower sounds underwhelming until you realize this drivetrain isn't about numbers, it's about abuse tolerance. These engines don't panic under heat, load, or miles. Owners figure this out fast. Real-world fuel economy lands in the high teens, sometimes worse, but nobody buys a 4Runner to save fuel. They buy it because it starts every morning, takes trails seriously, and shrugs off neglect better than almost anything sold in the 2020s. Here's the buyer mistake that future collectors will laugh at. People modify them heavily right away. Lifts, bumpers, tires, wiring, most will be used hard. The ones that stay stock, clean, and uncut will quietly become the valuable ones, especially late model years before electrification pressure forces real change. Production numbers were high, but attrition will be higher. Rust, off-road damage, neglected maintenance. Survivors will matter more than rarity ever could. Prices today sit anywhere from the low 30s into the 40s depending on trim. That feels normal now, it won't later. The 4Runner won't become collectible because it was exciting. It'll become collectible because it represents the end of Toyota building an SUV without compromise. And if you think that's the end of old-school luxury toughness, the Lexus version of this story quietly rewrites the ending. At first glance, the LX570 feels like a contradiction that shouldn't work. Too luxurious to be taken seriously off-road. Too old-school to compete with modern luxury SUVs. Too expensive to justify when new. And yet, that identity crisis is exactly what's going to make it special later. This was Lexus building a vehicle for a buyer that barely exists anymore. It shares its bones with the 200 series Land Cruiser, and that's the part that matters most. Underneath the leather, screens, and sound insulation sits the same naturally aspirated V8, pushing just under 400 horsepower through a drivetrain engineered for punishment, not perception. Hydraulic suspension, full-time four-wheel drive, locking differentials depending on year, real hardware, not marketing language. Here's the ownership truth. Most LX570s lived soft lives. Mall parking lots, highway miles, careful maintenance. Very few were taken off-road, which means many survived in excellent mechanical and cosmetic condition. That's the opposite of what happens to most capable SUVs, and collectors love that imbalance. Fuel economy sits squarely in the low teens, and that scared away cost-conscious buyers from day one. But the people who bought them new weren't counting gallons. They wanted silence, durability, and a sense of indestructibility wrapped in luxury. Lexus delivered exactly that, and then quietly walked away from the formula. The buyer mistake today is comparing this to modern luxury SUVs loaded with turbocharged engines and fragile complexity. The LX feels dated now because it is. In 10 years, that same simplicity will be its strongest asset. Fewer screens, fewer gimmicks, more substance. Clean examples currently trade from the low 60s into the 70s, depending on mileage and year. Depreciation has already slowed, and production numbers were never high. The LX570 won't be remembered as flashy. It'll be remembered as the last Lexus SUV that was genuinely overbuilt and unapologetically so. What makes these cars matter isn't hype, horsepower wars, or nostalgia bait. It's timing. Every one of these Toyotas and Lexuses was built right before the industry changed direction for good, before electrification became mandatory, before turbos replaced character, before durability took a back seat to quarterly updates. These aren't future classics because they're perfect, they're future classics because nothing like them is being made next. Most people won't notice until prices harden and clean examples disappear. By then, the conversation shifts from "why would you buy that?" to "remember when you could?" If you're paying attention now, you're early. And in this market, being early is the only advantage left. If you want to stay ahead of what actually matters in the used car world, not the hype, not the noise, you already know where to be. I'll see you in the next one.